Hi everyone, it's James here. Welcome to another video. Welcome to the garden. May have made a mistake coming out here. Thought it looked lovely and peaceful, but I've been out here for 5 minutes and we've had the recycling wagon going round. We've had cars and buses and strange noises. There's an old lady sweeping her drive over there. You'll probably be able to hear that. It's always a disaster when I come outside. I don't know why I do it. So the theme is songs and songwriters that were misunderstood. So this is where you get a song where the meaning of the song maybe doesn't seem to be quite so clear. People get the wrong idea about what it's about. A cursory listen to the lyrics maybe, or there's something about the music, the way the music marries to the tune. You know, it can fool you into thinking it's a different kind of song. That's what it actually is. You also get songwriters deliberately obscuring their meaning, writing in a kind of ironic way or a satirical way. And that's my way in, really. The satire of Randy Newman in particular sprung to mind. I did a video recently talking about some records I hadn't listened to for a while. I picked out a Randy Newman record, and I think it was Vinyl Richie made the point in the video. I think I'd said that Randy hadn't had many hits, and Vinyl Richie pointed out that Short People had been a big hit, which is true. That came from the Little Criminals album, I think 1977 or something like that. And of course that song got Randy Newman into trouble because on the face of it, it appears to be a very bigoted song, basically, you know, saying short people have got no reason to live. And then he kind of goes through and itemises all the ways in which short people shouldn't be tolerated. I can't remember the exact lyrics, but there's a sort of, you know, series of fairly incisive, unpleasant remarks about short people. And I'm not sure if the song was actually banned in America. It may well have been. So Randy Newman is a satirical songwriter, and he will often create a character and then inhabit that character in the song. So when he's singing, you're not hearing Randy Newman expressing his own thoughts, you're hearing the thoughts of the character. It's a very well established technique in novel writing, short story writing, but I think when people are singing, there's this natural tendency to identify the singer with the narrator of the song, which is not always the case. And of course in that song, the idea of it really was him lampooning this idea of targeting any minority group just because of some physical characteristic, whether it be the colour of their skin, the colour of their hair, how short they are, how tall they are. But of course the satire in the song is so subtle that it's kind of, you know, it's easily missed, essentially. And you know, Randy Newman was quite a challenging songwriter in many ways. He wrote about the Deep South. He wasn't afraid to use certain words and certain terms. In our more PC age now, actually, probably quite a few of the things he wrote probably wouldn't get through the censors. But that got me thinking about other songs which, you know, were either misunderstood, misinterpreted. So I came up with a few. I think I've got 10. 10 is always a magic number for me. The big one that immediately sprung to mind actually was Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen. And I must confess, back in the 80s, you know, I didn't go anywhere near that album because I'd heard the song on the radio and I just thought it was dreadful. That kind of fist in the air, pumping American anthem. I just thought it was horrendous. And that's really all I knew about Bruce Springsteen back in those days. You know, I've never been a Bruce Springsteen fan. Back in those days, I knew very little about him. And that song in particular I just thought was terrible, and of course it was widely misinterpreted as being this kind of gung-ho, macho, nationalistic song, whereas in fact it was a song about Vietnam veterans coming back from the war and being mistreated, and Springsteen was setting that ironically against this kind of gung-ho attitude. So, but of course musically the song is so bombastic, and just that chorus, that pumping chorus, you know, it's very, very easily missed. Let's do Imagine next. Imagine by John Lennon. And this is quite a tricky one. I mean, for many years I've had sort of running arguments with people and debates with people about Imagine, people who really don't understand the song or don't like the song because they view it as being very, very hypocritical. You know, the great irony of John in his white room behind the piano singing, Imagine there's no possessions, I wonder if you can. And it seems astonishing to me that people who criticise the song genuinely think that John Lennon wasn't aware of the irony. It's almost as if they think that he just made the song and, you know, didn't think how people would react to that, this idea of him being in this vast white mansion behind a huge, impressive grand piano while singing Imagine No Possessions. You know, I don't think he was necessarily singing it from that spirit. I think John Lennon John Lennon was never going to give up his possessions, and I don't think he was exhorting others to do that. The song is not a song encouraging people to give up all their material possessions. It's basically just a song inviting us all to imagine what it would be like without possessions. And, you know, we're all sort of capable of trying to imagine that. It doesn't mean that we're actually going to give them all up. So I don't think, you know, the hypocritical side of the song, I think, has been misinterpreted. It was also misinterpreted, that song, as being a bit sort of communist, really, you know. But John admitted in interviews that he wasn't thinking along communist lines. In fact, he was overtly critical of communism and said that his take on it was more in the vein of a sort of gentle socialism, really, and that's how he saw the song. The genesis of the song originally came from Yoko Ono's Grapefruit book, in which there are some verses in that where she encourages people to imagine this, that, and the other. So, anyway, an interesting one, a difficult one, because the iconography of it it seems to be so black and white. But you have to kind of dig a little bit underneath to find that there's perhaps more going on. There are some songs where people misinterpret the words, don't get the words right. There are some songs which I think are very mysterious and people actually don't get them at all. It's not that they misinterpret them, it's just that they don't actually derive any meaning from them. You get certain songs which are accused of being meaningless because people don't sort of understand the context. One for that, I think a big one, is Bohemian Rhapsody. And to be fair, it only came out in much later years that song was Freddie really on the cusp, I suppose, of properly discovering his sexuality and not coming out as gay, because he never did in his lifetime, but certainly confronting head on that kind of just those forces of opposition within his own psyche, you know, kind of wanting to come out, wanting to embrace a gay lifestyle, and not quite being able to do it. You know, that whole sequence in the middle with the Galileos and everything, and just him being racked with this sort of tortured, you know, confession, I killed a man. And there's so many clues in that song, but it's so heavily encoded that, you know, to this day probably quite a lot of people don't realise what the song is about. And you know, it does get accused of being meaningless or frivolous, and I think that goes for quite a few songs by Freddie. Might as well just quickly dispense with another Queen one while we're at it, one that I've always felt quite strongly about, which is We Are the Champions, which was always attacked for being a kind of you know, not bigoted but ego-driven song. You know, we are the champions, no time for losers, because we are the champions. But of course the song was not designed to be about Freddie and Queen trumpeting their triumph from the rooftops, really. It was an inclusive song. That and We Will Rock You, they were both designed for the fans, really, for the fans to come together and sing with the band, We Are the Champions. But again, you know, musically bombastic, and I guess the line, no time for losers, he was sort of opening himself up to that, really, I guess. R.E.M, The One I Love, a great song which is very dark, and ironically it's been misinterpreted over the years, always used at people's weddings, and you know, people see it as this great romantic song, a bit like The Police, I suppose, and Every Breath You Take. And there's a line in the song, isn't there, in the R.E.M song, a simple prop to occupy my time. And he sings fire over and over again, and there's clues in the song that this song is maybe about sort of, you know, control in a relationship, or maybe a moribund relationship. There's all kinds of readings that you can read into it, but because it's got that main line, this one goes out to the one I love. Lots of people don't sort of see beyond that or hear beyond that, and they end up thinking it's a love song. I think Michael Stipe found that quite funny. Blackbird by the Beatles, a song which everybody assumed, I think, at the time was just about a blackbird. And yeah, that's understandable. There is the sound of a blackbird singing at the start of it, but Paul McCartney later went on record saying this was a very veiled, sort of metaphoric song about the Black Liberation Movement. It was 1968 when all that stuff was going on. Blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. You know, essentially writing a kind of coded song of support, really, for the Black Liberation Movement, but very veiled, that one. And it comes on side 2 of the White Album, which has those rather sort of, was a few quite silly songs, you know, things like Rocky Raccoon and Don't Pass Me By, some quite light, fluffy kind of songs. Piggies is on there, though, of course, which has got a bit of satire to it. Yeah, I think Blackbird is quite an interesting one. And another one we've got here, right, so this is one that I always love this song, and I've seen it misinterpreted, I think, over the years. The song A Man Needs a Maid by Neil Young, which is on his Harvest album. I've seen people really ripping into this song and saying, what an outrageous song, you know, misogynistic and sexist. This idea that he's saying a man needs a maid, I just need somebody to come in and keep my house clean and then go away again. I don't understand how anybody could see that as being anything other than another one of these kind of Randy Newman-y sort of short story type songs where Neil Young is inhabiting a character, basically, of somebody who's, you know, probably down and out, down on his luck. His marriage is probably broken down. He's just absolutely, you know, on the verge of either suicide or a nervous breakdown. He just can't face life anymore. He can't face relationships anymore. Can't face the idea of commitment or devotion or anything like that. And he's just basically saying, a man needs a maid. All I need is somebody to come in and just, you know, wash up after me and then, you know, fuck off out again. And I think a very bleak self-portrait, not of himself, I don't think, as far as I know, not of Neil Young the person, but of the narrator of the song. That's always been quite clear to me, and that was a song which blew my mind back in the day when I first heard it. I remember thinking to myself, I've never quite heard anybody do a song like that in that way, you know, really clever. And I suspect Neil did it a fair few times after that in his career. And good, we've gone through these really quickly. I think there's only one more I want to talk about really quickly, and that's Brick in the Wall Part 2 by Pink Floyd. Which was released as a single in 1979, Christmas #1 actually, and of course it was attacked for being anti-education at the time, and I think either Margaret Thatcher attacked it, or, you know, there was a sort of reactionary right-wing element, maybe left-wing as well. I don't know if it was weighted politically either one way or the other, but it was seen, perhaps not, you know, fairly understandably maybe, as being a kind of anti-education song. You had the, you know, the iconography of Gerald Scarfe's video with the children being forced into the mince machine made into sausages and the hammers, you know, with all the fascistic Nazi kind of thing going on. But that's a classic example, I think, of a song which, you know, has to be heard in the context of the album. And I suppose it's not much good saying that. If you release it as a single, then by definition it's not going to be heard in the context of the album, is it? But if you do hear it in the context of the album and you understand what the album is about, you know, this character, the bricks in the wall, this guy who's had this character who's had a very bad educational experience. And, you know, Roger Waters was writing about a very particular period of history in the 1960s when there was a lot of very sort of unpleasant schooling, really, kind of left over from the 1950s. You know, the Beatles had it, all those rockers had it, the first generation of British rockers, you know, who all wanted to escape to art school. You know, they didn't like that strict disciplinarian approach to school teaching, and really that's what Roger was singing about. But of course, in the context of 1979, when there was a lot of poverty around and social problems and deprivation, there were probably a fair few people, you know, liberal, intellectual left-wing people sort of, you know, face-palming and going, oh, you know, the last thing we want is a rich rock band like Pink Floyd saying we don't need no education. But I think the story was a lot more complicated than that. But I think, in a way, Pink Floyd walked into that one. So I was going to just say one thing extra. As well as misunderstood songs, I think you can have misunderstood songwriters as well. And, you know, the two things are linked. But I would say Bob Dylan, I think, was a misunderstood songwriter, particularly in the early days of his career. When he first came onto the folk scene with all these very political songs, you know, things like Blowing in the Wind and Masters of War and all these songs. And I think, understandably, everybody saw him as a very radical, politically engaged young songwriter. And I think the expectation at the time was that he was going to turn into this long-term kind of just very, very militant political songwriter. And to be honest with you, having read the Bob Dylan biography recently, I don't think that was ever going to be on the cards. You know, people sort of say it was Dylan's accident, his motorbike accident, which changed him. He changed already. You know, he plugged his electric guitar in. He was doing these free-form songs that were just absolutely just, you know, acid-drenched, amphetamine-filled. He very quickly moved away from that political stuff. And of course, in later years, you know, he sort of revealed himself to be a fairly conventional person, really. You know, converted to Christianity, became a born-again Christian. I don't know what his politics are, but, you know, not a person I think he was ever going to be, that political firebrand that everybody thought he was. And maybe there was an element, not of cynicism exactly in his early work, but certainly I think he was more interested in the folk music form, you know, the form of folk songs. At the time, a lot of them did have a political angle, and I think Dylan was just exploring that as an artist in the same way that he was going to go on to explore, you know, very different kinds of song and different forms of songcraft, and the political thing really was just a kind of very small chapter in his career. So people misinterpreted him. They actually misinterpreted not his songs exactly, but they maybe misinterpreted the intent behind them and who Dylan was as a songwriter. Anyway, ramble over. Hope you enjoyed that. Leave some comments and I'll see you in the next video.